straight into it, like not kissing it, but like.
But almost.
Almost kissing it.
All right.
Not enough to like kissing any mics. But yeah, up to the face. Switch. On switch. Off switch. On and off.
Should have just left it on.
I know. It's like, boom, here you go.
Final home stretch of our day. We're going to do three things. We're going to start off first with some honoree awards and recognition, and I'll turn it over to our CISO panel for a great rich discussion to round out the hour, followed by prize drawings. Good luck to everybody, which will bring us home. So as we move into the honoree awards, for any of you that are wearing one of the golden or yellow lanyards, this is something special that we've been doing for the last year, really to recognize it. Could have been somebody on our team, it could have been a local player or somebody locally in the cybersecurity community that nominated you, or you stood out in a way that for providing outsized impact or innovation or contributions to cybersecurity, in this case here in Boston. So we want to make sure that you get some recognition, and we're thrilled to have had you here today. So to start off, we've got a little something for you. I've got a little certificate and a little award from us. More to come when you read that, but come on up and we will give you the recognition that's deserved. So our first honoree to recognize, we have Seth Elmer. All right. Thank you. Paul Pamba from Staples. Paul Pamba, Tier 2 cybersecurity analyst from Staples. Paul? Here in spirit. Edwin Yanes, an information technology security analyst from Digital Federal Credit Union. Right. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you. Ellis Wong, Director of Engineering and Application Security for American Family Insurance. Thank you. Jeff Carnes, Manager of IT Risk for the TGX companies. Geoff? All right, well, again, here in spirit. Kayla Bayusik, an application security engineer from Car Gurus. Megan Lally McGurl, a CISO from Enterprise Bank. All right. Mohammed Hooray, IT Audit Manager from Massachusetts Port Authority. Rafael Borges, Senior Manager of Information Security at Car Gurus. All right. Next, we have David Norman, CISO from Bentley University. All right. Ching Mei Feng, AVP Tech Risk Management from State Street, here in spirit. Ben Kusa, Director of Information Technology at Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager, again here in spirit. Angela Bartlett, an IT analyst from Kingfisher Systems. We were on such a roll, everybody in the room. Ted Lloyd, Director of Information Security for New England Center for Children. Ted. Alfred Chin, Cybersecurity Architect for Boston Scientific. All right. Joe Bentley, our amazing keynote speaker. I'm not sure if Joe is still, oh, Joe is right here, perfect. Global Business Information Security Officer, Liberty Mutual Insurance. Another hand for Joe for an amazing keynote session today. All right, and then our final awards will go to, I can introduce our amazing CISO and industry leader panel, who were kind enough to bring us home today with a great discussion. So I have them all up here. First, our Aaron Birnbaum, CISO for Seron Security, who's also going to be our moderator for this panel. Aaron. Kathleen Moriarty, Chief Technology Officer, the Center for Internet Security. Derek Morris, Virtual CISO for Wolf & Company. And to round us out, Ryan Davis, the CISO for NS1 and IBM Company. All right, Aaron, I'm going to give you your podium and your chair back. Turn it right over to you for what I know will be a very rich discussion on cybersecurity threats and practices by our amazing industry leaders and CISOs. So take it away, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope everyone is having a great time, and I would personally just like to thank Andrew, the staff, and everyone here that's made this a very enjoyable conference, and I think very educational, and I'm very glad about it, so I'd like to give him a hand. All right, now that I've sang for my supper. We have a nice-sized panel of some very sharp CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, and Chief Information Officers, which I personally am curious is what you see the difference. I'm going to start because I want to. What do you think the difference is between a Chief Information Security Officer versus a Chief Information officer. Anybody want to grab that one? Okay, next question. Besides the title and probably paycheck.
Is this on? Yeah. So I think the CIO, that role tends to live in towards the IT side of the house, where obviously you got the InfoSec officer, information security officer is kind of duh. It's about security. But both should be in sync, and what we see a lot too is one reporting to the other. Very rarely the CIO reporting up to a CISO, but as you might read on the internet, people are, pumping out content in and around how it should be flipped. So that's my humble opinion of a CIO versus a CISO.
I think that's very valid. Anybody else got 2 cents?
Sure. So the CIO would be more focused on your information and the overall information plan. So, and that includes where your data rests, where your data transits, and where the compute happens. And so you'd be concerned with the full information lifecycle with that as well. And considerations would really include the governance of that, and that incorporates the security aspects, the risk management aspects, the legal aspects for that information management process, and all that it entails, which includes infrastructure and the IT aspects.
That's a very good point. Very good point. All right. Well, now I'll go to the prepared questions now that I warmed them up. So obviously, some people in this room may have heard of ChatGPT or generative AI, so let's just cut right to it. I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. Previously, the question was, what is the potential impact? But I think it's more of, how do you think this is not going to change the security game as a practitioner, but how do you think it's going to change businesses, the way businesses do, in terms of developing security policies and frameworks, in terms of making sure their people are educated and and how it's going to Yeah, no, we're good. I'm just playing around. Sorry. Do you need me to repeat the question? Everyone must participate.
So I think the largest change is how we think about data moving around within our companies, right? So for so long, right, we had these boundaries that we could protect, right? Now we're operating in the cloud, and we have tools that are based on large language models that can literally generate things that very closely resemble what a human would output. And so the boundaries of our environment are no longer our four walls. I think we've all, as security professionals, known that for some time. Now it's well beyond just the SaaS tools. Now we're literally incorporating tools that are generating content that we don't know the origin of, right? And so I think as we really work as security professionals to try to wrap our heads around that, right? It's already there. We really need to put up the guardrails, right? We need to say, here's what good operations look like. Here's what our expectations are in good usage. What does bad usage look like? What are the intellectual property concerns? Are we just intrinsically trusting a piece of code that got output from a piece of AI and incorporating that into our product? There's just so many questions, and so I think really for me, the fundamental thing as security professionals that we have to do is start to have the conversations with the business about what good looks like, right? What are our expectations on how they should be using it, how they should be incorporating it, and what are really the safeguards or the double checks, right? What are the things we're comfortable with? What are the things that we're not so comfortable with? And then formulating some basic policies, right, around what usage is okay, what usage needs to have some permission, affixed to it. I don't think you can outright ban it. You can't say don't use AI, right? Like that would just be a very short-sighted approach because it's here, and if it's literally at the fingertips of every single person in your company, they're going to figure out how to use it, and we're going to have a whole nother round of shadow IT.
So what we're seeing now, at Wolf, we have a big part of our operations that's audit-based, and we're starting to see AI come into play there. I don't think it's going to replace anybody, but what we're worried about is the validation of the output. So you could remember garbage in, garbage out, a long time ago. It's been around forever. So we're worried about, validation of that. I also have some clients as well that utilize AI models to do some really impressive medical work. So like Ryan said, chiming on that, it's the guardrails because no one cared about the guardrails. They wanted the AI engine in there and the machine learning component. And then they worry about how to use it well, make sure everyone else is using it correctly. Unfortunately, security comes second sometimes, and that's kind of where the security is playing, right? No one designs it first, security focused. So that's where we're seeing a lot of the kind of workload around AI and ChatGPT, but it's a tough one to fight. People can do it. I mean, the kids are doing it in education nowadays. The news had some incredible story yesterday about kids doing homework and reports, and it's hard to see which is real and which is from them. So it's pretty amazing.
I think most people would agree that it's somewhat of a Hello. I would agree. I think most people think it's a Pandora's box. It's been opened. There's a lot of craziness going on, and we have to figure out how we're going to do it, how we're going to control it. And there's a myriad of aspects. There's the legal aspect. There's the IP aspect. I mean, who owns the output? Because it's at this point, it's not a machine creating that code. It's a machine creating code from other code samples that your organization may not own. So there are obviously other things in life besides security, believe it or not. But I think that you bring up a very good point. Is it is out. You both said the same thing. Essentially, it's out. We have to have some framework around it, and that's just from a business perspective, as opposed to ethical and legal.
One thing I noticed as a professor, I also teach at Georgetown. I'm an adjunct. And what I saw was not the problem I was expecting. I was expecting what you referenced in terms of students using materials or straight out using an LLM to generate a response to a question. And that only gets you so far because it's similar to a Google search. And if they do that, it's actually okay, as long as they do what they would do with a Google search too, where they would go out and find the resources to back up their content, verify it, and submit something. And so I actually have not run into that problem as a professor. What I have run into surprised me, and it was that students were getting high-ranking searches of poor content that had the, what's the term, the hallucinations. And one example, there's a few good ones, but one that had me reading these articles that they were referencing was on an AI operating system, a blockchain operating system. Obviously, the module content was on operating systems. And I was reading this content, and it was just
Wrong.
not real. Yes. Yes, and they were quoting it and all talking about it in a discussion, and I couldn't believe it. So and it was from vendor sites, so if you have a content developer, my word of advice would be make sure they're validating their content before they post it. Even though it looks good, it might not be accurate, and then the avalanche from that can be pretty big.
Very accurate.
All right, so I'll take a different approach and say that I think it really depends on where it's deployed and how it's deployed. Because to me, the biggest challenge we have, and what I see as a challenge in using general purpose large language models that are outside the scope of our control, it exposes potentially confidential data. So as an employee, I'm asking it questions that I want it to solve for me or collect the right sets of data that are out there that save me a bunch of time. But now who's on the other side that can see those requests? And we know if you take GPT in any of its forms, it's essentially, whether you have the free version or the paid version, they're using those inputs to reinforce the model over time. So it really depends, I think, from my perspective. So in the past, I've built some distributed large language models that essentially get trained in the cloud and then get applied on-prem. And I think that's the model that we're going to see more and more. The training is expensive. The running of the model is not, right? Standard hardware can do that today. But it's really, how big is that model? How do you deploy it? And then, again, it does come down to the guardrails. But I would ask all of you, just with a show of hands, how many of you have in your organizations acceptable use policies around these sorts of capabilities? Does anyone have them yet?
Wow.
A few?
That's very
Because
surprising.
I think that's, and is it an acceptable use policy that goes beyond you are not allowed to use it? Or is it just a you shall not? That's, because I expect that's where we'll all start, right? The you shall not. Now, how we stop it from happening is a whole other, set of challenges that we have, especially if you go home and do it because you know what you want to ask it, right? So there's a lot of challenges around how we would safeguard it. But I think moving forward, if we start to deliver purpose-built capabilities for use within the organization that can be managed and secured and protected and audited, then maybe we have a tool that's really valuable. Now, I'm talking in general, right? There are lots of products and tools that will have some amount of ML or AI built into them. How real that is varies from vendor to vendor, but I think when it comes to large language models, that's partly how we need to look at it.
I think those are very good answers, and I don't want to derail the whole topic on AI, but I figured a lot of people would be, really interested in this. So we'll go with an easier one. Each of you, what are the biggest threats within your environment or your customer base that you're seeing, and what are most people actually concerned about? There's no wrong answers.
I work for Center for Internet Security. They support the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. These are organizations across our country that include our state, local, tribal, and territorial organizations, many with very, very few resources. At the county level, I've had CISOs say their local entities are lucky to hire a high school student on break, right? And this is the current reality. And so ransomware is very real. You see it on the news when K through 12 is hit. That's part of the purview of the state, local, and tribal and territorial organizations is coverage for that. So I think, authentication, we're in this transition phase now to phishing resistant, and there's a reason, right? That has been traditionally in the last few years one of the highest attack vectors. And we heard about the API as a vector. That makes a lot of sense too, something that we need to bake in coverage and really move towards zero trust to get away from these problems, but doing it in a smart way where we're choosing infrastructure that has it built in and maybe shedding some of those layers. So what I see is that people are inundated with all of these layers that they need to purchase, and they can't, right? Especially the entities we deal with, because it's truly an unserved market or an underserved market where they have to manage the infrastructures the same way that a big bank would be, and that just doesn't make sense. So, I think we're still going to see these attacks until this push for built-in security by design, by default, that's also managed at scale, and that's something CIS cares about, that it's managed at scale over time to reduce that burden so that these smaller entities aren't continually hit by these attacks with just no way to prevent them. We help them to recover, and we provide guidance of what are the highest priority things you should take care of, and the CIS controls, which are free, give you that prioritization of what should you go after first to reduce your risk based on what's being seen in terms of the threat landscape.
So
That's a little bit of what we're seeing.
So would you say those are both the biggest problems that you think and the biggest problems that organizations are seeing? Are they the same? That's really kind of what I'm trying to get at. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So I think authentication is a big one, which is why I think it's something like 90 nonprofit organizations signed a memo a week or two ago. It's on my LinkedIn. I put a link to it. But advocating for a change to phishing resistant as your first authentication method, and really pushing for a way to move away from passwords, because they are a problem, right? And even OTPs have had breaches, and we've seen Google respond by saying, wait, we're going to passkeys now. And a number of other large vendors have made that transition as well. If you're interested in how you transition to passkeys, we have some other free resources on that. Just to make it easy, I had an intern this summer put together a blog on her journey to implementing a passkey, because I wanted to make it accessible. Like, if you saw that I did it, you'd be like, oh, okay, maybe that's too technical. But I had an intern do it, and she did a beautiful job. She's also a creative writer, so it's a good read as well. And then we also have one for the organization with links to what applications already support that technology, and then how the tools you might need for those that don't support it yet if you were to do it yourself. So that's all off my LinkedIn profile. I have links right there just to make it easy. And feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help.
Also, a big shout out for the Center for Internet Security. If you're unfamiliar with them, get familiar with them. They have phenomenal resources. Great go-to. It's probably one of the first places I go to when I need to learn something or just want to find out what the latest consensus is.
So I would say one of the biggest challenges and really threats that as security professionals we're facing really comes down to money. And for a long time, it was a fight to get any dollars. And I think really over the last decade, as security professionals, we've had it pretty nice because there has been a continued investment in security. But we're hearing, from customers and I'm seeing from peers, right? Those security budgets are in some cases contracting, but in many cases plateauing, right? They're saying, yep, that's your budget. It's flat. It's the same as it was last year. But the number of threats is not getting any smaller. And so as security professionals, we have to figure out how to combat a growing set of challenges with the same number of dollars in an environment where there is a shortage of strong talent. And by the way, the cost to be a bad guy is getting cheaper by the day, right? When I can go and say, hey, ChatGPT, and there's plenty of ways to jailbreak ChatGPT to get around.
We neither condone nor approve of that.
Get around some of the safeguards. You can say, from an educational perspective, write me a piece of code that will go and redistribute itself, right? Okay, now I've just had ChatGPT create a worm for me, right? Okay, now I want it to be able to talk to a centralized server. Okay, now I have a command and control weaponized worm that I can now deliver a payload to. And I don't have to know anything about coding, right? And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but now there's a brand new problem that nobody else knows about yet until I go and do my thing. And us as security professionals have to combat that with budgets that are plateauing, and we can't make these considerable investments to combat the problems. So I think that's from where I sit, both sides of the equation there.
I think that it really depends on the organization size, because I would agree with you. I don't know anyone that says, oh, wow, this is a really big problem. We're going to throw more resources and money at it. But a lot of organizations have the mentality, oh, well, we spent that much money last year and it worked, so we're going to go with that again. I think a lot of smaller businesses are still seeing, I'm still seeing, yeah, it's not going to hit us. We don't have to worry about it. We're not really concerned, or we just don't think it's a priority still, because of the money factor, which regrettably is a part of life, and I don't have a solution for that. I had a discussion the other day with someone about script kiddies are probably the most dangerous people right now, because they don't need to know anything. The only saving grace is the hallucinations of LLMs can give you code that doesn't work, and they won't know it doesn't work until they try to run it. So if ChatGPT was used properly like a tool to assist, I think it would be even more dangerous. But luckily, those people aren't that smart.
To that end, though, in the hands of the right person, and we've seen it, ChatGPT used for phishing attacks,
Yep.
right? A high target CEO, C-level executive, you can go and have a large language model write a very good email that is very convincing. You can even have ChatGPT write in the tone of. That is to say, if you can provide it a sample of somebody's writing and say, I want you to write it like Bill Gates. And it's incredible, the output that you can get that seems incredibly convincing that person wrote that, phishing email or whatever it may be.
And then you can get a audio version of that text to be read on their voicemail or something like that.
I'm going to jump back to the costs for running security programs. And I'd love to get a feel from each of you. When your organizations are looking at new applications, usually those decisions are made in a business unit, right? Is this correct? And the business unit will then hand off, this is what we want, you have to secure it, you have to provide the infrastructure, thank you. Is that how it works in most organizations? Or do you take an approach, and I personally think this should be more of a best practice, that your IT and your security needs are assessed up front with each of those applications to look at it as a total picture, as a business application and costs for that business application, as opposed to security being a separate layer. So how many are doing the latter? Was I really, okay, so I didn't think many were. So one is, and that's something I've been pondering a lot at CIS. We do best practices. Should we really push a best practice to move in that direction so that it's more on the focus of the business application and the business risk, to our keynote's point at lunch, right? It's business risk. Can we start thinking of it more that way, and then potentially lower the costs, because we might be acquiring infrastructure that costs, or applications that cost less from the infrastructure and security perspective.
The people that said that they do this, I'm curious, do any of those people have P&L responsibility? Do they have their own budgets they control? Because I would think that all of them would. Because again, it's going back to money. Yep. What are you seeing? What are you seeing, and what are other people seeing?
As a vCISO, I get to see a lot of small to mid-sized businesses in different industries, financial institutions, pro sports, some audio-visual companies. Their challenge is money. Their challenge is understanding the need to have somebody own security, not just be that other thing you do.
We got an IT guy. We're all set.
Yeah, we're good. We're covered. Yeah. And because the stance of that, they're not leaders or early adopters of a service. Take Teams or OneDrive for an example. Is they'll wait till everyone else does it, take a look and say, are they good? Yeah, okay, now let's try it. Now you're a year out, everyone's been complaining, people want to adopt and move and go for it, and it moves too quickly without that security arm in front of it to help with. So that's what I get to see. It's a lot of chasing around of different, security elements that we have to cover. But one other piece that's ringing in my head is
Don't listen to the voices.
is the fundamentals, the basics, the simple stuff. You see tons of content out there of just, have basic passwords set properly, any configurations for patching set properly. It all gets overlooked with all these fancy tools and all these great vendors. It sometimes needs to take a step back, kind of reboot everything and take a look and make sure that those fundamentals aren't getting, jumped over or anything like that. So, it's fortunate for being a vCISO because we'll come in and help with all that and build all that, mature it all. So that's where I see with the small businesses is that lacking. And I'm sure everyone else has that problem in a small business. It's just not enough there. Throw money and throw people at it, it'll fix it.
I think that it's endemic, though, because is anyone from Okta in the room? Okay. Big security company, big problem. How did they not have their house in a row? How did all of the organizations that preach security, sell security, recommend security, not have their own houses in order? Because it's not easy. And because it costs money, and a lot of them are beholden to shareholders. But that's great. So we also talk a lot about communication, implementing changes, making sure our rules, our regulations, our guidelines are in place. That usually involves a discussion with C-level CEO, other C-level executives. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations for people that are trying to affect change that have to go to approach a C-level person to get that budget, buy-in, whatever you want to call it? Are there any things that you would recommend or any things that you've seen that have been effective that people could bring back if they're trying to affect change or make their organizations better? Not it.
So having been a CISO in the past, I'd say leading with business risk was something that always helped with my program advancements. And I think that's where the thought of, should we be taking that further step back, looking together with the business unit would make the most sense. So, I think if you are to frame more in the terms of business risk and also trying to look at this big picture in the way that Derek mentioned, that you look at the whole program, you might have to rebuild some things. You might look for products that have security built in. If you're going with something cloud native, is it really cloud native? And did they take an approach where some of the zero trust elements are just part of it? And then what don't you need? I also, in the coming months, we're going to see some big changes. How many people here have heard about TLS being more encrypted in the coming months? So a few people have. Okay, great. So you won't, your TLS session, so all your web traffic, anything going to Cloudflare, which is like 70% of the web traffic, will have the server destination name hidden from you unless you disable that within your environment, and then your IDS and IPS will not see it. And so your control points switch to either DNS or the endpoint. So this is going to lead to a refactoring of your defense layers. And so I think really taking this step back to think about, okay, what's being handled differently now, and how do I have to adjust? And we're going to continue to see that pattern over the coming years. The security is going to change with security built in by design and by default, and also a push for strong encryption. So all of these trends together are going to have a really big impact on your program.
It's always DNS.
As the guy here representing a DNS company,
Great lead in.
Yeah, no, in all seriousness, in terms of getting things done, I think you really have to come back to the human element. Understand, what drives people. What are the things that they want to get done? Attach yourself to their success. Understand what the business drivers are. What are their goals for the year? For me, that's the way to get security built in. Okay, you want to roll out this new CRM by Q3? All right, I'll help you do that. I will give you my resources, but let's figure out how we're going to do that securely, right? Build it in, give them an incentive to work with you rather than say, oh, well, I know you're rolling out that CRM and here's the 10 things that we need you to do before you, that's just not going to work. Attach yourself to their success and it will be your success. And as I try really hard to look at security as, we get this reputation of being the department of no. I really try to think about it as let's be the department of yes, but let's figure out how we can work together and do it securely. And I think it almost doesn't matter what the initiative is. If you can attach yourself to their success or show, if it's a sales leader, okay, here's how you working with me can be a sales differentiator, right? Here's how it's going to be, beneficial to go up against, a competitor. We're going to have more compliance or, more certifications that are going to lead to more sales in the market. Understanding what those business drivers are and affixing yourself to those leads to greater success with security.
Yeah, I think you definitely bring up a very important point. In marketing, you're trying to find a way to have a mutually beneficial relationship, ideally. If you see someone with a need and you can fill that need, then you want to approach it. If you can't figure out what that need is, you maybe shouldn't be approaching them. And the same thing with the C-suite is, if you're going to go to a CFO, you better put it in dollar and cents. If you're going to go to a VP of sales or a senior sales manager, you got to put it in, hey, this is going to help you sell more. If you're going to take it to a CEO, you got to say this is going to position you different in the organization. And then that's going to be key. I have a bunch of questions, but I think that the best use of the time that we have would probably be for people in the crowd to ask questions that they specifically have, because we have a wealth of knowledge here, of people that can provide you with some input or insight, or you can just make fun of us. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions? Because I could do some stand-up and... Yes. Hi, Mike.
So I know that one way that we were able to address budget for cybersecurity was getting it on our ERM program. So it's listed number 6 in our ERM program. So when I need money for something, I can say this is addressing a direct issue that's on our enterprise risk management program. And I don't know what you guys have done in that space or what your recommendations are on that.
Your ERM, meaning your enterprise resource management?
Yeah.
Just making sure. It's like MAC. Everybody knows what MAC stands for, right? I didn't even know what an ERM was, so.
None of you guys come under ERM.
I'm a CTO.
Yep.
Yeah, so from an IT perspective, we don't get a lot of talk inside of our boardroom meetings. But the enterprise risk management program does. That's something that gets presented to the board. And so being able to say that budget is addressing line item number 6 on our enterprise risk management program. We're an insurance company, so things like climate change is on our enterprise risk management program. Fighting to get cybersecurity on there and showing, as Joe talked, how this is an enterprise risk. It's a risk to the business. You can then address it and kind of help get funds towards.
So if
actually,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Now that I have more context, that helps. I am actually on our risk committee, which our board has one, and then internal, our executives are, some of us are part of it. And it's actually run by our CISO. He keeps track of all the risks, but they are business risks too. They do expand out. It's not just security risks. And it is tied to, prioritizations, budgets, and then, what is the risk? What's our tolerance for it? How are you going to treat that risk? Which also leads into the prioritization.
I thought you meant like an enterprise risk management solution. You're talking about a risk plan, as I would call it, or a strategy or a business strategy. I see. Okay. I think, again, you need to put in context to your audience something they can relate to. And in that case, it's all business planning. So I think it's great that you guys do that. I think it's wonderful. Anyone else having a question? If not, I have a very interesting scenario to share.
Yeah, Francis, I want to ask, as a layman point of view on risk, when is a business or an organization is at risk?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
When is your business is at risk?
When is a business at risk?
Or organization is at risk, yes.
It
Now.
depends. It depends on the business, right? And then your prioritization, what is important to that particular business. It might be data, you might be managing money, you might be, it really depends upon the nature of your business and what could impact that business, right? And it's really going to be different for every single organization.
Let me put it this way. How can you relate the vulnerability, the risk, and the threat in a business?
How can you list the risks?
Relate these three terms: vulnerability, threat, and risk in a business.
How can you what? of those
Relate
things?
them, relate the three, bring them
relate
together
them.
to see how these these three entities affect each other.
So,
What I'm trying to say is this: in a layman point of view, somebody saying something is at risk. For instance, if I have my house open, but there is nothing like threats to thieves or somebody infiltrating my house, would I say my house is at risk? When there is vulnerability, vulnerability is like it's open, but there is no threat.
so
Can I say there is a risk at it, or we have to combine threat and vulnerability to get risk? That's my question.
Okay, so the first rule that I was taught of security is figure out what your assets are that you're trying to secure. And if you have a business, you have a risk because you have the future of the entity at risk.
If there is no threat, can you say it's at risk?
I'm sorry?
If there is no threat to anything, can you say that business is at risk?
Absolutely. You don't have to have a threat to have a risk.
So how can we relate threat, risk, and vulnerability?
So I'm going to argue you and say, let's go back to the definition for risk. I think it's in 830. I'm usually good with numbers. Oh, I'm getting a yes, so I must be remembering correctly. Likelihood times threat or impact. Thank you. Right? And so you can, and then those boil down to how do you figure out the likelihood and how do you figure out the impact where you're considering your vulnerabilities and your threats, right? So one credit card being at risk is going to have a lower score than, a million. And then depending on what the vulnerabilities are that, lead to that exposure, changes that risk formula as well. So yes, there are formulas. Go to 830, and there's other resources like FAIR and other risk management pieces. I did this work several years back, and so I'm a little rusty, but those are the key resources. They are very good.
Okay, so in summary, I don't know if I'm right. Can I say the risk is a result of threat and vulnerability?
And likelihood.
The likelihood is the probability, right? So
Vulnerability is the vulnerability is the way you exploit it, right? But and you're talking more about quantifying that, right? So being able to look at how do I figure out what my overall level of risk is by putting the right kind of parameters in, right? Would that be fair? So is that, are you looking, is it just internal risk? Is it risk of vendor solutions? Like those, because there are things that are out there, like third-party vendor risk management solutions that will help to quantify that at scale across, tons of customers, if you will, and what their experience was. But I dial back and think about it from the standpoint that, we need to remember that security is just a function of risk mitigation. There is always risk, and it's really about prioritizing which things are most impactful to your business that will cause the most harm. I spend a lot of time focused on healthcare as an example, right? A risk there when we talk about ransomware in healthcare as a very specific risk. Ransomware not only impacts the business operations of the organization in a healthcare setting, but it also impacts the ability to deliver good patient care, which can have direct impacts to, lives lost, if you will, because when these things happen and there's no longer access to the electronic systems that are highly dependent today, you go back to paper. And if you don't go back to paper, you stop operating and you send patients to other organizations where they don't have that problem. And recovery tends to take on the order of weeks to months, right? So I think it's really all just about a specific risk that you have and how impactful, if that risk is
it's exploited.
Exactly, right?
Okay.
So have you done a risk register? Have you sat down and determined the risks to the organization, including Sharknado and Volcano? Because they're potential risks, but the likelihood is very low, but they're still risks. You need to do environmental, you need to do political, you need to do technological. There's a number of aspects that go into determining what your risk profile is, so that you know, as you pointed out, where am I going to spend my resources? Where am I going to allocate man hours? Where am I going to allocate time? Where am I going to buy software? Where am I going to hire new people? It's and I'm not trying to be curt, but it's a very, very complex question.
Yeah, okay. If I have a risk, I have a vulnerability or weakness, but it is not prone. It's not prone to threat. Is that risk?
Yes.
So that system has a
Yes.
risk.
Yes. It's very low. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
What do they call it? The inherent risk, right? Just
There you
inherent
go.
risk sitting there until you do something to move it.
Right. You can never remove 100% of the risk. As I say, I could take your laptop, I could sink it in concrete, and then and put it in a briefcase and put it in the bottom of the ocean. It'd be pretty secure, but you couldn't really use it. And a lot of times in security, and correct me if I'm wrong, in my experience, you have to balance those two. You have to balance usability, and the business needs to function, or it's not a business with being secure, and it's definitely a balancing act. I think everyone in this room would probably agree with that. And if not, just nod your head anyway, because it'll make me feel better.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to go back to your first question. You asked about the difference between a CIO and InfoSec.
Yes.
If you remember that?
Yes.
And because I'd like the panel's opinion on this, okay? I think InfoSec mistakenly gets shoved under the CIO and technology, okay? Probably because many of us with gray hair and otherwise came up through technology, right? Mm-hmm. So, but technology at the end of the day is simply a tool that we use, and it's one leg of the three-legged stool of people, process, and technology.
Right.
Okay, so I would argue that maybe InfoSec would need to migrate more over towards the legal and the finance side, because when we talk about risk, we're quantifying the risk, okay, into real dollars and cents. Okay, so it has an alignment there. It has 1 foot over here and then 1 foot over there. So you asked the question, but I'd like to further comment on that from the panel.
No, I think you bring up a very good point. I think historically it's been a CIO role that maybe in the past 10 years, people have come to realize, hey, you may have a person that does IT, and the head of that is a CIO, but we have a different mission here. We have security, which isn't purely an IT play, so we need to have the highest person in that organization, in our organization at a C level. So now we have a chief security officer, which is usually physical security, or a chief information security officer. But the two are definitely used interchangeably, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think you bring up a very good point, though. Did you have Mike him.
We have to ask you to wait. You've been instructed.
Yeah, just take that one. Not my mic.
So I've seen it with a chief security officer, and then I've also seen the information security report into enterprise risk management. So your CRO,
right,
to get the separation of duties between technology and security.
And sometimes a COO, and sometimes a VP
Yeah.
of engineering. It also assumes those roles.
Just have one question on that. So in that scenario you just mentioned, is the CIO and the CISO, are they peers in the organization? Or is the CISO kind of firewalled off underneath? They would be peers.
The CRO and the CIO are peers. Okay.
So I just literally earlier today read some IANS data that was, I think, roughly 250-ish CISOs was the sample set. And the data that came back from that was, there was about 7 different places that CISOs were reporting within the organization today. And 62% of that group felt as though they should be reporting to the CEO. And I think that probably above all else illustrates where security professionals believe the importance of our role is. I think now the rest of the world needs to catch up. And I think, we're starting to see things like, the SEC lawsuit, where, we're being held accountable just like all the rest of the officers of the company. And I think that's a pretty meaningful shift.
Also, the SEC came out with a rule now requiring every publicly held company to have a CISO or a chief security, however you want to phrase it, role, which is going to be very interesting and very good for the fractional V CISO business, I imagine. But it's absolutely changing. The environment is definitely changing. Were there any other questions? Oh, now everybody's got. Everybody waits till the end.
One question. Hopefully, I don't tie you up too long. Actually, it's a segue into essentially the C-suite collaboration model going forward.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hey, if you're in here for the presentation, that's wonderful. If you would be quiet, and if you're not here for the presentation, would you please be quiet? Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So my question is actually for the panel to see if, especially the CISO roles, in the age of AI and generative AI right now, there's actually the importance of having the chief AI officer role to be part of the C-suite collaboration effort to help define OKRs to protect both internal and external threats, right?
So your question is, I just want to make sure I understood it correctly, is should there be a chief AI officer, and is that a security role or is that a separate role?
It actually, as part of a security-focused set of OKRs they work together on. This is similar to the age of when GDPR was introduced. There was a role of the chief data officer that would basically be on a C-suite to work together with the CISOs and the CIOs.
So is your question, should there be one, or?
So my question is actually for the panel to see if you actually have the opportunity to actually work with these chief data science officers or in the corporations to establish these OKRs, security-focused OKRs or not.
Okay.
So I can just add, in my humble travels, with organizations that I saw had an element of AI as a core to their application, their service that they were doing, I haven't seen a chief AI yet. Down the road,
Yeah.
I bet. It rolled into CTO. It was just technology, just lumped in because of that. As well as the data science, because the output from that AI component is just data that has to be, manipulated in some way. So that too fell under the CTO. And I would think if this scaled appropriately, you would see those roles fall out. Then where do they report to? Probably still near technology. That would be my guess. But that's
Makes
my,
sense.
my
Does
short
anyone
travels
have
in
an
that.
experience where that's not the case? I'm just curious. Oh, yeah, you got to get me in trouble again.
So our chief data officer reports into the CIO.
Okay. That makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. There was another question? The young lady over here?
As everyone here today see lots of new vendors, and some of the vendors are very new, have been in market like less than 2 years. And I just wonder, the panel have any advice on how to adapt to new technology? What is the your approach? Lots of time we like to use benchmark of peers, but sometimes you have urgent need. And what's your advice on this?
Security is changing, and you might need some of these other add-on products, but as we go forward and as you think about your zero trust journey, you really should consider what is built in and then what is the extras that you need, and also consider how security is changing. There's a big push to cloud native, and there's a reason why. It's because with cloud native, you can do things like integrate code checking in your development process. And then in the next year to 2 years, I chaired a workshop this morning on supply chain security, so SBOM integration, and there was lots of great proposals and early work happening. You're going to start to see this folding more into the cloud native environments in particular, because they'll have a capability right in the, for people not familiar with cloud native, I'm just going to say in the IT management aspects that do things like check to make sure your code and your supply chain is as expected. And then when it's running in this environment, in a couple of years, you're going to be able to also understand with native capabilities that are baked in that your posture is as expected. So this is actually something I'm working on in the IETF, and others are working on in the IETF, a lot of us, who want to have that posture assessment baked in, and it's going to be on your container orchestration management system. So we're going to have a big reassessment in the next couple of years in terms of what does security look like and how it falls out, in my opinion.
Was your question specifically about security, or was it in general the new technologies that are being evolved?
Security.
Okay. Because I think that, I hate this word, but, well, I don't hate it, but we live in a dynamic world. It's constantly changing. What was a problem last year isn't a problem this year and won't be a problem next year. Or it will still be a problem, but it'll be a new flavor of the month. There'll be something else that someone came out with that's now threatening hospitals, healthcare, for instance. One of the first things I learned for security is the preservation of life is always the most important thing. And when you start to mess with schools, hospitals, there's no regard for life. The bad guys are not playing by rules. They don't schedule pen tests. And it's important that we as security professionals and people in the security industry all understand, I'm not saying get down and dirty with it, but do realistic testing. Think about yourself as an adversary. Find somebody that's a red teamer and buy them a few drinks in a bar or something like that. Or talk to a vCISO because they probably, or excuse me, any CISO. Talk to anybody and they've probably seen some threats and maybe they're going to give you some insight on how you can deal with them and how you can make your organization better. Or There may be a threat out there that you're just not aware of, that you didn't go to CIS and find out. Because no one can know everything. And using threat feeds is great because you get a lot of information. Using LinkedIn, you can get a lot of information. You could even ask ChatGPT, hey, every day, send me an email of the top 100 exploited vulnerabilities in this month. And I'm sure there's websites that will give you that as well. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. Because it's going to change. It's absolutely going to change. I mean, if you think back a year ago, how many people were like, oh yeah, I'm building AI into my application? Now, everybody's got it. Oh, look at that, AI. I mean, and it's good. I'm not saying, it's not like blockchain. I think it's really good, and I think it helps. But again, I think it's a tool, and I think that it's very important that it be used as a tool, as an aid or as an assistant, and not as a replacement. So I don't think everyone's going to lose their jobs either. Thank God. Yeah, unless Skynet becomes self-aware. Did anyone else have any questions? I want to be respectful of time. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending. I'd like to thank our panel very much. Some great dialogue. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the people that made this possible, which is the vendors. They're all here. And the great products that they have. I personally found a whole bunch of new stuff that I think is really neat and interesting that I was completely unaware of. So I'm glad they were here, and I hope you all had a great experience.